let's say that in these first months of the new Trump administration, not necessarily Trump himself, because he's not a strategist. You have a president of the United States who cannot read an intelligence report. And according to people who know him personally, some of our sources in Washington and New York, he doesn't read anything, literally. How can he make informed decisions when you don't understand key concepts, background of very complicated dossiers, and make an informed analysis on different variables, especially in very, very complicated issues? He cannot do that. He does that by instinct. He does that in a very transactional way, as we can call it in English, but basically a hunch or based on something that he heard in the past 5 minutes or so from one of his advisors in a very close circle. But the decision that seems to have been made by his administration after 1 year in power, either they would bet completely on all out war and mostly against the global south, or they would bet on some sort of reform of the international financial system, which would imply a much more diplomatic approach. They chose the first approach, which is hybrid and in some cases hot war against several nodes of the global south, including taking over territories, which would be the case of Greenland, kidnapping presidents and taking over their energy resources, the case of Venezuela. And in the case of Iran is all that and much more. Because Iran is a keynote of the BRICS, as you mentioned. And we can say that the four top BRICS are, no doubt about that, Russia, China, India, and Iran. It would be an excellent opportunity for the Trump administration to blow BRICS from the inside, attacking directly one of their members. And of course, connectivity corridors. For instance, Russia is directly involved with Iran and India in the international north-south transportation corridor, which unites three BRICS nations. And it's an alternative to the Suez Canal and to connectivity corridors controlled by the US and the West. So this would be an extra blow against alternative corridors. And of course, the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Roads, the Chinese New Silk Roads, because Iran is a key node of the Chinese New Silk Roads in West Asia. So the case of Venezuela and Iran has many similarities, but energy is key in both cases. And we come back to the petrodollar issue. The United States could never allow Venezuela sitting in what they call their backyard, selling their oil in yuan. Absolutely out of it, and not in petrodollars. And of course, the Chinese were already buying Venezuelan energy in petro yuan, let's call it. And they cannot allow Iran, which is something that Iran has been doing for the past few years as well, to sell their energy, oil, and gas in petro yuan or in other currencies apart from the US dollar, away from the petrodollar. So this is where Venezuela and Iran intersect. It's the same energy dossier concerning both of them. They didn't get what they wanted in Venezuela because even, and this was completely crazy, we have a meeting in the White House with the heads of all the energy majors in the US, and they tell Trump in his face, we cannot invest in Venezuela. It's it's uninvestable. We have to create new conditions. I wrote a column about that explaining why. There are two main reasons. One, sanctions devastated the Venezuelan oil industry. So you have to rebuild all that. And what was rebuilt towards a Chinese ecosystem with Chinese technicians, because this was the oil that was being exported to China. So the Americans will have to start from scratch. It will take years. It would take hundreds of billions of dollars. And obviously, a CEO of a big company look at that and said, no way. And who's going to guarantee to me that Venezuela is going to be stable? We can have, if Trump decides to replace Delcy Rodriguez and install a puppet government in Venezuela, there's going to be a major guerrilla battle all across Venezuela against the Americans. In Iran, the same thing. They tried a regime change operation until, I would say, 24 hours ago. It was a major disaster, even with a massive campaign all across the West, propping up these fake protests, not the original protests. There were original protests in Iran, cost of living, inflation, etc. Okay, these are real problems. But of course, they used, as they always do when they try a regime change operation, they use real protests, turn it upside down, get their infiltrated cells, and they turn it into a regime change operation, which is exactly what they tried in Iran, and it failed. So all these reasons, including the major petrodollar reason, they stay in the chessboard. This means they're going to try again. Because as we mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, this is an empire that needs extra natural resources to as collateral to their 38 trillion and upwards debt. Andre, the reaction from the Chinese so far has been a mix of disbelief and dismissing as one of countless Trump's outbursts that he even forgets about it 10 minutes later. Because it's completely unrealistic. It's the same thing. If he had said anything about Chinese in Africa, it would be similar. And China has invested in 35, almost 40 different African nations. And the way, and Russia in terms of political capital as well. So Russia and China are the new soft power, and in some cases, hard powers in Africa. And in the case of China, China is the new soft power and the new economic power all across Latin America. For instance, Brazil, which is the most important Latin American country in terms of GDP, in terms of reach in the South Pacific, in terms of being an international player, a member of BRICS, of course. China has been the number one commercial partner of Brazil for over 10 years. If I'm not mistaken, at least around 15 years. The relationship starting at the top, when Lula was president in his first two terms, with Hu Jintao, and then now in this third term, the Lula with Xi Jinping, is very, very close. And the relationship between business circles in Brazil and business circles in China is immensely close. For instance, China can go to Brazil, they buy a plant by Ford that was not being used, they turn it around, they turn it into a BYD plant, and it's going to be one of the biggest car plants on the planet. In a state in North Brazil that was not traditionally a state where foreign firms were investing until a few years ago. You cannot change that with proclamations by President of the United States. This is not going to change. And in the case of, even in the case of Argentina, which is now, for all practical purposes, an American colony under this latest government, this can change with the next Argentinian government. And the contracts that China had with Argentina, these are contracts, signed contracts, which Argentina simply cannot tear it down because the Americans are telling them to do so. Forget it. They will go, everything will go to a court of law somewhere, anywhere. Buenos Aires, New York, London, whatever. So try to expel China with these, I would say, warlike proclamations. No wonder the Chinese reaction so far is really saying that? Does he really mean it? Does he understand what he's saying? Obviously, he doesn't understand what he's saying because this is sold to American public opinion. He's posing as this macho man who is defending American interests in his own reasoning. Not at all. This is not going to change. For instance, China will be probably responsible, Chinese companies, to build the This is something that is being discussed in South America, I would say, for at least 30 to 40 years. The famous bi-oceanic railroad from the Atlantic coast of Brazil to the Pacific coast in Peru, finally uniting South America. Who can pull that off in record time and with the engineering know-how? Chinese companies, of course, and they have already started. They already did the first studies, etc. So what does the US has to offer to Latin America and specifically South America to counteract the Chinese trade, investment, and sustainable development offensive? Absolutely nothing. The Chinese don't see this extremely complex geopolitical interaction, and of course the fact that the economies are linked by trade, commerce, investments, etc. The fact that China is still part of the international financial system. You have, for instance, Chinese banks worried about secondary sanctions against them. It's a very, very it's a very Chinese strategy, very, very long term. There is this element which is, I would say, it's classical Sun Tzu of watching your adversary commit mistakes and not interfering with these mistakes. The Chinese are masters at that. They see different American administrations making one big geopolitical or geoeconomic mistake after another. But, they just observe. At the same time, they have now a component that they didn't have, I would say, until a year ago. They are self-confident enough that when they are under pressure by the US, like the first Trump tsunami of sanctions last April, May, I was in Shanghai at the time, and the Chinese were unanimous, from the think tanks to the men in the street. They don't have the right to do this against us. We will resist. This is not the old China where we took everything passively. So now, not only their response, diplomatic and commercial, is very, very strong, and they're self-confident enough to know that from now on, they won't revert to a path of accommodation with the US. And they understand the American system very, very well. You have some of the best analysts in China. Many of them spend quite some time in the US. They know the system from the inside. They know the psychology of the industrial military complex, of how Congress works, how the presidency sometimes doesn't work at all in the US. They know all that. Just like some of the best Russian analysts, absolutely the same thing. The strategy that Russia and China use to deal with US is quite different. And this is something that, as an external observer myself, I wish there was more interaction at the highest level between Russian experts on China and Chinese experts on Russia. I don't think that's enough. We need more. We need more interaction from both sides, and especially to understand that the Russia-China strategy vis-a-vis the US is complementary. It's part of the Russia-China strategic partnership that President Putin and President Xi Jinping are talking all the time. This understanding at the highest intellectual and analytical level is essential, because this current war, which will have many other repercussions, is essentially against China and Russia, and also against BRICS and the global South as a whole. It's the empire trying by any means that they think that they have in their hands, annexation, harassment, threats of war, threats of bombing, provocations towards regime change, etc., which are going to be replicated everywhere, is against the global South as a whole. And the leaders of the global South, let's go straight to the point. It's Russia. They're Russia and China. That's it. You cannot escape it. And they should be leading the global South into organizing an organic response to an empire that is now completely out of control. What's going on in the Greenland dossier in Europe is like we are watching a comic show. The last I checked, I think a few hours ago, I checked how many NATO and European experts have been dispatched to help Greenland. Apparently, not even 30 at the moment. So it's a
Уже
gigantic
30,
army,
да?
a gigantic army of less than 30 people who are going to defend Greenland against the Americans. And obviously, we all know that the Americans can buy Greenland for a fortune. There's a figure circulating already that Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, is going to offer $700 billion that the Americans don't have, by the way, to buy Greenland. It's possible, but they can buy it with even less because the European Union itself is so scared that they are practically telling Trump, look, you can come here and have it, but please don't kill anybody. It's completely absurd. Can you imagine that last week they were still trying to convince Trump to have European peacemakers, meaning troops, in Ukraine in case ceasefire is organized between Russia and Ukraine. So these multinational forces, peacekeeping forces, should be European. They were begging Trump for that. And at the same time, they were completely freaking out with the prospect of the United States gobbling up Greenland with no resistance. So they sent the prime minister of Denmark and a Greenland minister to talk to Trump. And at the end, you look at their body language, we can tell that it was absolutely horrible. This means that the fate of Greenland, is already sealed. We still need to know the modalities of how America is going to incorporate Greenland. And there's absolutely nothing that the European Union, the European Commission, the European Parliament, individual nation states in Europe can do about it, except scream. So it is a pathetic exercise, in fact. And they're still thinking about, of course, okay, let's slap more sanctions against Russia. Let's slap more sanctions against Iran when they have a problem of the dismemberment of the European Union inside their own territory.